Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 950. My opponent started off here with e4 and I went e6, the French defense. He went knight f3, leading into the two knights variation. It's not very popular, but I've seen it actually a few times in over the board chess, so you will run into this if you play the French defense. Anyway, I continue playing the French. I can actually transpose into a Sicilian with the c5 here, but I was out to play the French and there's no reason not to. And then knight c3 is usually the idea here. When they start with this move, then they play the other knight out, and this is known as the two knights variation. And the first time I saw this, I actually played with this c5 move. But that gets you into a bit of trouble. After c5, they can take right away, or they could play the bishop check first, or they can play the bishop check now. And you have to walk into this pin, because if you block with the bishop, then that leaves the pawn under defended here on d4. So knight c6 has to be played, and they've got this annoying pin here, and they can mess up your pawn structure. It's a little bit better for white. So you generally want to avoid that variation. Easy to get into trouble there. Anyway, let's go back to the opening book. I played the main move here, which is knight f6. He played e5. He can also take here. It's another way of playing. You exchange, and then this just turns into a variation of the exchange variation of French. So it turns into another kind of standard position. Although this knight in front of the pawn is maybe a bit unusual, but it's very similar to an exchange variation French. And let's see, or the way he plays it, he pushes on with e5, and this turns into a kind of advanced variation, or similar to an advanced variation. So you just drop the knight back. It seems funny to be allowing the knight to come back, but it's actually in a good spot here, putting pressure on the center and supporting pawn to c5, and then this knight can come out to c6. So you actually have pretty harmonious development from this point. And then a normal continuation might be like this, d4, c5, you would take, and then, well, you don't have to take right away. You can throw on knight c6 first, putting a little more pressure on this pawn. He defends, and then grab here. And this is a fine position with equal chances for both sides. So typical kind of French position. And games have been played from that. Anyway, in this position, yeah, he went bishop b5. So I don't think that's a good move. I think, and we're out of the book too. I think black should be a little better after this, because the bishop really has nowhere to go from there. When I kick it, it could retreat, but I've just gained some time. This is a useful move anyway to keep the knight from coming into that square. So this has all been helpful to black. Or if he trades, which is what he did in the game, then I've gained the bishop pair. Now it turns out the most accurate way to play is to take back with either the queen or the bishop and leave this knight free to come out to c6. I didn't actually think of that during the game. I played this knight takes move kind of reflexively, thinking, well, it's useful to have it over here looking at these squares, but it's more actively posted on c6, so probably that's what I should do. Leave the knight here, take with the bishop, push the c-pawn, and bring the knight out to c6. Be a better way of playing. So a couple of missteps from both sides, and now we're back to a position which is about even. So he castled, I get in c5, plays rook e1, I go bishop e7. He goes d4, and I thought about taking, but I think taking here doesn't really help. Let's see, well, let's move on a few moves before I talk about that. Let's see, he went queen d3 here, and then I went c4. Yeah, so this is my last chance. I could have taken here, and then I expected him to take back with a knight. That's a good square for the knight. I've already covered these squares, so he can't advance on that side, but what he can do is keep pressure on the e-pawn so that it's hard for me to get in this f6 break that I often want to play in the French. So that's why I didn't take. And the chess engine here likes the move b6. It doesn't want to take either. It just wants to hold the tension there and be prepared to take back with the pawn. So if white takes, you can take back with the pawn and keep control of the d4 square. So interesting way to play. I kept the knight out of that square by pushing the c-pawn forward, and also gained a tempo on the queen. So I think this is okay too. And then I went f6. So the f6 here, the chess engine thinks is a mistake, actually. although I think it's a pretty typical way to play. But you did see that the e-pawn became weak, and that is something you do have to be aware of when playing a move like that. So maybe I didn't take sufficient account for that. And the chess engine would just go with b5 here. So, and just live with this structure on the center, live with these pawns in the center here for a while. Find some other way to liberate this bishop. Anyway, yeah, I suppose I could maybe arrange to push all these pawns forward and liberate the bishop that way by bringing it out here as an alternative. Anyway, I went with f6 right away. It's often the way I play, and it just probably was not the most accurate way to play here, but it's often an idea in the French to try and undermine the center right away. So he takes, I took back, and with knight g5, I think he is just winning this pawn, although the chess engine found a tricky way to defend. He didn't, cancel that, he didn't have to play knight g5 right away. He could have played bishop g5, which was rated about the same by the chess engine, but I kind of prefer it because it gets a piece off the back rank and connects the rooks. So it just makes more sense to me. Anyway, he went with knight g5, and I went with bishop b4 here. I couldn't actually find a way to defend the pawn, although the chess engine likes this idea. Move the queen to the side, which doesn't really defend it. It just gets the queen out of the way so that when he takes, you can move the rook, and not lose the exchange there. And then you have a backfire tactic along this file. So this actually is turning out okay for black. So that the knight will probably have to retreat, and then you can move the bishop aside. And now the problem is that the queen steps aside. You can take here and take the knight. Let's see, does that really work? If the queen goes there, then you take the knight first, and then you take the rook. I don't know. It seems like it's a bit tricky. The chess engine is giving moves like queen takes e8. But it seems like black has at least compensation for the pawn. I can't say how all the tactical complications work out there, but if the queen moves away, one point is that this rook is defended on e1, is undefended on e1, so you have to be a bit careful about that. Anyway, he didn't play that, or I didn't play that. I didn't see that idea, so I just moved the bishop out of the way, planning to trade the knight off when it hits that square, and then take this knight off so I don't lose the pawn on d5 as well. I felt like that might be getting under pressure. Also, by getting rid of this knight, I give my knight a square on e4, although it turns out that's not a permanent post. But anyway, yeah, he went ahead and grabbed the pawn, which is correct. I took back, and so white is better through this part. He's really just up a pawn, although I thought it was still playable for black. During the game it seemed that way, but yeah, the chess engine thinks white is just up a pawn. Let's see, he went bishop d2 here, and yeah, I went ahead and took the knight so that I could bring my knight into e4. So the way the way the chess engine would keep an advantage here after bishop d2, I take, is the chess engine would take back with the bishop here instead of taking with the pawn like he did, and then after knight e4, kick the knight and go for this setup. So this is just queens and rooks, so nothing but heavy pieces. White is a pawn up. This pawn might come under fire too. He can actually bring his rook in. Have to be a bit careful. And he has a bit of a damaged structure over here, so maybe I can bring my queen out to counterattack these pawns over here. But it seems like white maintains a one-pawn edge in that position. Anyway, in this position he took with the pawn, and now the chess engine thinks things are more or less even here. So knight e4, he has to move the bishop, and then I can grab a pawn here, or play rook f6 like I did in the game, and the chess engine approves of this. I don't have to grab the pawn right away. Let's see, he went queen g4, and I lifted my queen to d6. It actually thinks queen to b6 is a more accurate move. I don't know, it seems a bit weird to me to put my queen opposite his bishop like this, but I guess there's no tactics there, and maybe there's something on the b file. Well, the other thing that's weird about this is that he can always bring his rook to chase my queen away there. But if I get in knight here, then that would actually control the b1 square. So maybe it's okay for that reason. Anyway, I went queen d6. He went g3, preparing bishop to f4, which I didn't notice actually. The chess engine would actually play f3 to chase the knight away, as in the other line. But this is still okay for white. Let's see, I went here, and white is still a little better because of the extra pawn. He went bishop f4, and I went queen c6. Although I do get a pawn back here anytime I want it. Let's see, instead of queen c6, it actually likes queen a3 better. It's an interesting move, and round up the pawn with the queen. Maybe it's a better way of grabbing that pawn and putting pressure on the a pawn too to keep his rook tied down. So that's an idea. The only thing I don't like about it is it pulls the queen away from the king side in case there's action over here, but it looks like there's nothing immediate going on, so it seems like that was playable. Anyway, I went queen c6, and now here's his first big mistake. I mean, all the moves up till now have been mistakes up to now have been minor inaccuracies, but this is actually a game-losing move according to the chess engine. Well, it gives a pawn back, and it's an important defensive pawn around the king. And then he follows it up with another mistake. The knight is here, and it's hitting his queen. So let's back up. Did I didn't say what another move was instead of bishop e5. I think, well, I don't know. He's probably got a lot of moves here that he could play. Anyway, bishop e5 seems to be the mistake that cost white the game. Because I can take this pawn with a tempo on his queen. And now let's say the queen steps aside. This would be best play. I could play something like rook f5 to get my rook out of trouble. He could go rook e2 to chase my knight. The knight can hop back to e4. I think that's the point, is that once I've grabbed this pawn, he can never chase this knight away from this good post. And I've got the better minor piece. So even though the material is even, the chess engine just rates this as a winning position for black. So I guess if I were to count my trump cards here, one of them is the knight on a square where it can't be taken by a minor piece. So it's an eternal knight. White will have to sacrifice the exchange if he wants to get rid of it, and it's a great central location. The second advantage I have is at the moment I have absolute control of the F file, although he can play a few moves and maybe try and get back. And then I have better activity here. My queen can quickly come over to the king side and pile up over here, or my queen can come out to this side and attack the pawns on the queen side. So just that combination of activity and better pieces seems to lead to a winning advantage for black, even though the material is even. But well, in this position, after I played knight takes f2, he played queen g5. He was trying to keep his queen on this g file, but there's no way to do that without severe loss of material. So this was just a blunder, and I almost didn't notice it. I had the move rook to g6 prepared as a response to this, so I already had that in mind. And my rook was still, the other rook was still defending the knight, so the knight was no problem. But looking at the position for a little bit, I did eventually notice that knight to h3 is a big fork, and he resigned at this point. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.